If you have ever planted ginger, there is a good chance you did what most people do. You bought a plump rhizome at the grocery store or the nursery. You dug a hole 4 or 5 inches deep. You dropped the rhizome in, covered it with rich, dark potting mix, watered it like you would water a tomato, and waited, and waited. And in 3 or 4 months, you went out to the bed and found one of two things. Either nothing had happened at all, and the rhizome had quietly rotted into a soft, sour mess underneath the soil, or a single pale shoot had finally pushed up, weakly, late in the season, with no real vigor behind it, and the harvest that fall was nothing to write home about. That is the most common ginger story, and it is not because ginger is hard to grow. Ginger is one of the easiest food crops on earth to grow, once you understand what it actually wants. The reason most people fail has very little to do with the plant, and almost everything to do with a single unspoken belief about how ginger should be planted. A belief almost everyone carries into the garden without examining it. The belief is this: ginger is a root. Roots go in the ground, so ginger goes deep. It sounds obvious. It sounds almost too simple to question. And it is exactly the belief that ruins ginger harvests in backyard beds, in raised boxes, and in patio pots all over the country, year after year. Because the belief is wrong, and once you see why it is wrong, you will look at ginger differently the rest of your life. The same way you looked at planting depth differently the first time someone told you a tomato wants to be buried up to its neck, and a pepper does not. The difference is right there in the plant, and almost nobody reads it. Here is the part modern gardeners forget. Ginger did not evolve in a temperate backyard bed with rich bagged potting mix. Ginger evolved as a tropical surface crop, sprawling across the floor of a shaded rainforest, where the rhizome creeps along just under the leaf litter, not buried deep in the soil. The rhizome we eat is, biologically, a modified stem that wants to ride along the surface, sending roots down and shoots up, every few inches, laying down a new knob of itself. When you bury a ginger rhizome 4 or 5 inches deep, you are doing the opposite of what the plant is built to do. You are asking it to climb back up to where it wants to be, in soil that is colder and wetter than it prefers, while the rhizome itself sits far from the warmth of the sun-warmed surface where it actually moves. This is where the rot comes from. Not from disease, not from a pathogen that happened to wander into your bed. From the fact that you put the rhizome in the wrong place to begin with. Bury it deep in cool, moist soil, and the rhizome sits there waiting for the signal to sprout, but the temperature is too low, the air is too thin, and the rhizome softens long before the eye swells and pushes. You dig up what is left 3 months later, and there is nothing recognizable in your hand, just a smell. That is the cost of the deep plant habit, and this is where the weak harvests come from, when rot does not take the rhizome first. The shoot that finally emerges from a deep planting is pale, thin, and a month or more behind where it should be, because the rhizome burned energy getting vertical instead of laying down fingers. The leaves that follow are smaller than they should be. The rhizome stays a single fat knob the whole season because there is no warmth at the surface telling it to spread laterally and lay down new knobs. You harvest in October, you pull up one piece of ginger about the size of what you would buy at the store, and you wonder whether ginger is even worth the trouble. Sometimes you give up on it for 2 or 3 years in a row, blaming the climate, blaming the variety, blaming yourself. But the climate was fine. The variety was fine. The mistake was the depth. It is. You just have to stop planting it like a carrot. Now here is the old trick. The one that has been quietly working in kitchen gardens, in tropical homesteads, on grandmother's back fences, for generations, long before ginger had a vapor of the marketing it carries today. The trick is not one thing. It is 2 or 3 small things done in a particular order, and the order is what makes the whole thing work. The first move is pre-sprouting. You do not plant a dormant ginger rhizome straight into the ground. You give it a head start, in the dark, in a warm place, where it can wake up on its own terms before it ever sees soil. Take a healthy piece of ginger, a rhizome with firm, plump fingers, eyes visible along the sides, skin tight and unwrinkled. Skip any piece that feels soft, that has mold on the cut end, or that smells sour. Put it in a paper bag, or in a shallow box loosely covered with a damp cloth, or even in a clean plastic container with a few slits for air. Do not seal it. The rhizome needs to breathe. Set the container somewhere warm and dark, on top of the fridge, inside a kitchen cupboard near the back, on a seedling mat set to about 75 degrees. Leave it there for 2 to 3 weeks, checking every few days. What you are waiting for is the eyes to swell. They will not be dramatic at first. The skin over an active eye will tighten, then slightly bump up, then a tiny green or pale nub will push through the cuticle, no bigger than the tip of a pencil. That is the signal you are looking for. Once you see 2 or 3 of those green tips on a piece of ginger, the rhizome is awake. It is ready. It knows which direction is up. It is now a plant, not a piece of produce, and it is ready to go into soil under exactly the conditions that will let it run. This is the move the old growers used, and it is the move most modern guides quietly skip. They tell you to plant the rhizome and wait. They never tell you that the rhizome has a built-in delay that costs you about a month of the season, a month in which the rhizome can either wake up properly or quietly rot. Pre-sprouting moves that month indoors, into a controlled environment, where the rhizome cannot rot because the air is dry enough to keep the surface firm. By the time you take the sprouted rhizome to the garden, you are planting a plant, not betting on a piece of produce. That distinction is the difference between a confident season and a guessing season, and it applies to almost every rhizome you will ever grow. The second move is shallow planting. When you put the sprouted rhizome into the ground, do not bury it. Press it into the surface of a bed of loose, well-drained soil, with the green tips pointing up, and cover it with about 1.5 inches of soil, no more. The old growers who worked with ginger in tropical climates never put a shovel's depth of soil over a rhizome. They pressed it in, they mulched over it, and they let the plant climb through the mulch on its own schedule. If you are working in a raised bed, a large container, or a 5-gallon pot, the same rule applies. A piece of ginger that has been pre-sprouted wants about 1 inch of soil over its back and a few inches of room around it in every direction. It does not want to sit in a deep hole. It wants to ride along the surface, just like it does on the rainforest floor. A pot is not an exception to this rule. A pot is where the shallow plant rule shows up most clearly, because the depth of the container makes the difference between a rhizome that lays down fingers all season and a rhizome that struggles to push a single shoot. The third move is mulch. Heavy mulch. This is the part most modern guides underplay, and it is the part that, in practice, makes the biggest difference between a soft, lazy harvest and a heavy, fat, multi-fingered rhizome by the end of the season. After you have pressed the sprouted rhizome into the soil and covered it lightly, lay 2 to 3 inches of loose, dry organic mulch over the top. Straw, dried leaves, chopped sugarcane, wood shavings, anything that breathes. The mulch does 3 things at once. It traps warmth at the surface, where the rhizome lives. It locks in moisture without smothering the soil, and it slows weed competition, so the ginger does not have to fight for light and nutrition in its first 2 months of growth. This is the trick in 3 moves. Pre-sprout in the dark. Plant shallow, mulch heavy, and once you understand why those 3 moves work, you realize they are not really a trick at all. They are an old, common-sense reading of how ginger actually lives. Tropical plant, surface root, warmth-loving, mulch-loving. The trick is not something extra you do. The trick is something you stop doing wrong. Now let me walk you through the whole season, in practical order, because the contrarian correction only matters if you can actually carry it out. Timing. Most of the country has 1 ginger growing season a year, from late spring through early fall. Ginger wants soil temperatures above about 65 degrees before it will actively grow, so your planting date is not a calendar date. It is a soil warmth date. If you are in a region with cool nights in May, wait until late May or early June. If you are in a zone where the soil warms early, you can plant in late April. The safest test is to put your hand flat on the soil at 10 in the morning for a full minute. If the soil feels chilly against your palm, ginger will not move yet. If it feels comfortably warm, almost like bath water, that has cooled for a few minutes, plant. Pre-sprouting takes 2 to 3 weeks indoors, so start the rhizome about a month before your soil warmth date. That timing matters more than fertilizer, more than the variety you choose, more than anything else.